So the other day, LifeSiteNews published an exclusive bombshell revelation that Pope Leo XIV participated in an explicit Pachamama ceremony that they describe as clearly idolatrous. And this was back in the 90s when he was an Augustinian priest in South America. The evidence is based on the resurfacing of a book called Teologia Agostiniana, which is a Portuguese book about interpreting Augustinian theology from a Latin American perspective, I guess. In the pictures, then, Father Prevost appears to be participating in a ceremony in which participants are kneeling and gathered in a circle, with the caption of the photo mentioning a celebration of Pachamama, which means Mother Earth. Based on this, a gentleman named Mario Dirksen, who is quoted in the article and was the apparent source of the story, he concludes that Leo is guilty of having committed idolatry and should publicly repent now that this is a scandal in the public. The only reason it's public, however, is because Dirksen and LifeSiteNews decided to publish it publicly. Otherwise, it looks like it was a long-forgotten, kind of an intimate gathering. It should also be noted that Mario Dirksen is the curator of the website Novus Ordo Watch, which is a sedevacantist website. So if you don't think there's an agenda being pursued here, you'd probably be kind of naive about that. With that said, dismissing a claim because of its source is a genetic fallacy and a bad reason to think that the claims or arguments are simply false on those grounds. A person can be biased or have an agenda and still be telling the truth or making sound arguments. So the first thing I want to say about this is that it's not worth losing your peace over. I know people will disagree with me on this, but just hear me out. In fact, this is a resounding theme in spiritual masters of our faith, like St. Francis de Sales, Teresa of Avila, Ignatius of Loyola, as well as contemporaries like Father Jacques Philippe. They all say nothing is worth losing your interior peace over. And if headline news is having that effect on you, maybe just back away from it. At the best of times, it's usually a distraction from the things you have an actual influence over, the duty of the moment. In this case, if you're a layperson like me, getting agitated about things like this is futile because it can't be converted into meaningful action. You don't hold sway in Rome. Arguing with people online about it, spreading the news yourself, shaking your fist in the air, none of those things will actually fix any apparent problems in the church. You still owe obedience to your shepherds and the Pope, and you still have an obligation to grow in holiness, which sacrificing your peace through futile outrage is absolutely incompatible with. But naturally, as you expect, Twitter, or X if you're a modernist, erupted into a frenzy of hot takes and anathemas sent in every possible direction by the keyboard inquisition. So I wanted to address the topic for the sake of people who are finding their faith challenged by it with this disclaimer. I'm not a journalist and I haven't pored over the details of this story to the degree that others have. So I'm sure there are lots of things people can point out about it that I'm unaware of, and there's probably things that will come out in the future as well. But I also think there's a delusion that is easy to fall into with online intrigue like this, in that if you devote hours of scrolling and commenting and obsessing over the latest trending topic, then it becomes easy to convince yourself that you've done the necessary due diligence and thorough examination of the evidence and are therefore above any reproach or accusation of making rash judgments about it. But endlessly poring over insufficient evidence doesn't mean you've somehow produced more evidence that make a conclusion about it prudent and measured. It just means you've taken an obsessive interest in something that is probably a serious distraction from the duty of the moment. In this case, we have photos from almost 30 years ago that, without the caption that appears in the book below the photos, it could be depicting just about anything. It could be a wholesome prayer circle. It could be an example of ecumenism gone too far. It could be an instance of an American following along in something he didn't quite understand because he doesn't speak Portuguese. It could be that someone miscaptioned the photo in the book. It could be that he was caught unawares, and instead of risking offending his host or the company he was with, he just decided to go through the motions. I know that happens to a lot of priests. It could also be that he was breaking the first commandment. But do we know one way or the other without a doubt? No, because there are many possible alternative explanations here. There's no definite proof that he committed idolatry, and if you want to insist that it is proof, you have to also demonstrate that he was actually worshiping something other than God, that he was intentionally giving divine worship or latria to some object other than God, and that he intended to do so. And I remember what photography technology was like back in the 90s, and I can speak as an authority that we didn't have the resolution back then to capture intent, like the way we do now. That doesn't mean there's nothing to be concerned about here. Certainly syncretism as an evil substitution for humanism is something that has been far too pervasive in the church and the life of the church for the past 60 years or so. And that is something that church authorities should take seriously and want to correct and show willingness to correct. But here's the thing. I lived through the 90s, like I said, and dude, those were some crazy times. In fact, if you got a hold of my family home videos from that era, you'd find instances of me bowing down to images that have nothing to do with proper worship or divine worship, because I, like every youth in the aftermath of the Karate Kid movies, was enrolled in karate classes. And at every class, there was an opening ceremony in which we spoke Japanese, the words I didn't even understand what I was saying, in which an image of the founder of our branch of karate was hung on the wall. And we turned to it and bowed down in actual prostration to it, as well as to our senseis. Was I committing idolatry? No, because nothing about that in my mind or my will was intended to be an act of divine worship. And that's not all. I've also been guilty of a whole variety of sins in my past. Many, thank God, I no longer struggle with, but if I did, they would certainly disqualify me from doing this kind of work. Now imagine if someone were able to produce evidence, like photos of these past sins, and bring them to light today. It's the kind of thing that would dismay a lot of people and likely discourage them from ever wanting to listen to anything I have to say again. But this is the thing about Christianity, is that God doesn't leave us in our sins. And what's more, 1 Corinthians 1:27 says, "But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong." The fact that God can use someone like me or Pope Leo to bring about his will is a way of using weak things of the world to shame the strong. And Hebrews 8:12 says, "For I will be merciful towards their iniquities, and I will remember their sins no more." So, on what grounds do we have to dig up the past behavior of our ecclesiastical superiors, assume the worst about it, assume they haven't repented, and then demand that they do so publicly because it's now public, because we made it public? Nothing about that strikes me as godly behavior. And you might want to point out that I wasn't a priest or even Catholic when I was in karate, and he should have known better as a priest. Maybe that's true. But at the same time, when I started exploring my faith, I was something of a blank slate. I was approaching it fairly open and just wanted to learn what it was and how to practice it. He went to seminary in the 70s and 80s, and if you're convinced that the 90s were a crazy time, like I just tried to assure you, then the 70s and 80s were even worse. He was likely taught all kinds of things about ecumenism and syncretism that are totally contrary to the tradition of the church. And I've met lots of people with theological formation from that era. When I was young and still finding my place in the church, I was involved in founding a young adult ministry because I didn't have any friends as a new convert. And one of the up-and-coming, cool young priests in our archdiocese was assigned to us as our chaplain. Who, the more I got to know him and discuss topics of a theological nature for the events that we were putting on, the more I realized he was completely unfamiliar with the thought of St. Thomas Aquinas, the perennial doctor of the church. And that doesn't happen by accident. The magisterium has said very clearly and in multiple ways and multiple times that St. Thomas should be the standard for seminary formation. So the fact that so many priests have specifically not read St. Thomas is actually a deliberate act of rebellion by their formators from an era in which that was the norm, and it still is in some places. And again, this all presupposes that those blurry images are all you need to know, that this was a willful act of idolatry. But I don't I don't even see any statues or graven images in the pictures that were uncovered. I don't see anything here that suggests an idol was even involved. For all we know, this was something as innocuous as kind of a Christianized summer solstice celebration. So jumping to rash judgments that insist this is beyond any reasonable doubt proof that Pope Leo XIV apostatized or committed idolatry as a younger clergyman, it's just obviously uncalled for in my mind. And in case it needs repeating, rash judgment is a very grave sin, if not a mortal sin. But as with the so-called Pachamama incident with Pope Francis, I would say the gaslighting and telling people there's nothing to see here, nothing to be concerned about, that isn't an appropriate response either. Because the use of images in the church is fairly clearly defined and something we've, I would argue, really lost track of, especially in the age of modern art and ecumenism. And thanks be to God, we have councils that define the parameters for us, like Nicaea II in the 8th century, which resolved the iconoclasm controversy. And so if you're not familiar with that, iconoclasm was a heresy that said any use of sacred images in icons or statues was idolatrous and should be outlawed. The church's judgment was against that and determined that iconoclasm was a heresy. Basic logic of that conclusion is that because God chose to depict himself materially in the incarnation of Christ, the second person of the Holy Trinity, it is also fitting to depict the mysteries of the new covenant in material form as well. And that doing so is an incarnational part of our faith. It's fully in line with that fact. It also clearly defined how images are supposed to be used, teaching that they are signs that point to true realities, spiritual realities like Christ and the communion of saints, and that as long as they are venerated with the intent of looking past the material object or the art and to the true God, then this is totally appropriate and acceptable and even praiseworthy for devotion and prayer. Only when they obscure the true object of our worship, namely God, do they then become a problem. This is also where the distinction between latria, which means worship, and proskynesis, which means veneration, comes from. The former is reserved for God alone, and the latter can be given to creation, to created persons. Again, as long as the honor is not for the art or the object, but for what it depicts. Just like a photo of a loved one, you keep, well, at least I do, we keep mementos like that, not because of our affection for the material of the printed photo and the ink, but for the person it depicts. And when it invokes affection from us, the affection is for the person and not for the image itself. Then later on, the Council of Trent clarified something that we've been gravely, no pun intended, neglected in the modern era, which is that images must avoid anything confusing, misleading, or theologically incorrect. And they should not contain elements that are profane, indecorous, or doctrinally ambiguous. Vatican II went on to teach that sacred art should never be lacking in noble beauty or repugnant or confusing to the faithful. But modern art, by design, tends towards all of these things, towards abstractness, novelty, profanity, irreverence, unconformity, and ambiguity. That's baked right into the philosophy of modern art, and there is a philosophy of modern art. And the same was true of this the scandal involving Pope Francis, or at least the apparent scandal. In its immediate aftermath, there was widespread and frantic speculation and argument about what that statue was that was carried around and venerated by people in the Vatican, both in the gardens and I think in St. Peter's Basilica even. Some claimed that it was an image of the Blessed Virgin. Others said it was a pagan idol. Others, a meaningless piece of art. But whatever it was ambiguous, confusing, and clearly not aligned with the teachings of Nicaea, Trent, or Vatican II. And therefore, it was scandalous. Pretending otherwise is naive and uncharitable towards people who have real legitimate concerns about the state of leadership in the church today and those events. Concerns that never probably would have been entertained to the degree that they are today had there not been widespread revelation of the absolute worst kind of betrayal among the ranks of even bishops in the sex abuse scandals. And as a result, the laity are just far more skeptical and prone to scrutinizing the leadership in the church. So for people who are upset and agitated by this and maybe have lost their peace about it and want some sort of resolution, I'd want to ask you, like, what do you want to happen here? Do you want him to resign? Do you expect him to repent publicly? To be honest, I don't want the papacy to be so obsessively attentive to public relations so that every accusation that gets tossed from the peanut gallery is treated like something that the Roman pontiff needs to make a high priority. If the church were a democracy, that would make sense. But the PR people who are employed by the church and who advise bishops and the Holy See, they will insist that they do otherwise, as they have in the past, because there is no democratic accountability in the church and there is no need for him to resign. The church just doesn't work that way. He doesn't rule at the pleasure of the laity. In fact, he's our superior, and we have no right to pressure him by means of outrage or any other kind of disciplinary punishment inflicted by the peanut gallery, even if it's justified, which here it's not clearly justified. St. Thomas Aquinas says fraternal correction can only be made by a subordinate to a superior in the order of humble charity, and never by discipline or punishment according to the order of justice. We don't have the authority to do that, and acting like we do is objectively disordered. Just like with a father of a family. If he is exposed as failing in that role in some way, the children aren't in a position to demand his resignation and to send him to his room or something like that. They can, in charity and humility, ask for his reform, but they can't demand it or use punishment to incentivize it. And a family is a much better way of thinking about these things than a polity or a democracy in which scandal precedes accountability at the ballots, if not resignation. And just like in a family, a good father, maybe he shouldn't ignore confusion and wounds that he is guilty of inflicting, and maybe he should address it in those cases. But simultaneously, children shouldn't engage in detraction or rash judgment and slander when they suspect fault on the part of their parents. So there's just a lot wrong, I would say, in this situation. And to whatever degree Pope Leo's at fault for something that happened 30 years ago, we're no better if we expose it to the world as a fascination for headline news, instead of dealing with it discreetly like a family should. Okay, one last thing I'll mention is that I've seen some people claiming that this is just further evidence of the apostasy that they're anticipating at the end of times. And yes, many church fathers and doctors say there will be an apostasy of the faithful before the second coming, but they never say the Pope will apostatize or that the church will fail. And the church clearly teaches that it cannot fail in its mission. There will always be a visible faithful church with the Pope as its head. So this isn't evidence of that. And if you believe or expect that to be coming and you're trying to reconcile current events with that notion, that's just simply not correct and contrary to magisterial teachings and the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Hey, thanks for watching that. If you found that clip edifying or beneficial, I would ask you to consider supporting this work by liking, subscribing, commenting. All those things really help in the algorithm. Praying, or by joining our community over on Locals, where you get exclusive opportunities to interact with myself and others, and exclusive content. We're also running a monthly hangout studying philosophy and theology together. So if that interests you, head over to brianholdsworth.ca/help or click the QR code on the screen.